What would you do if you changed from a nobody into one of the most powerful people in the country, overnight? Hojo Masako was the wife of Minamoto no Yoritomo, the founder of Japan's first shogunate. Yoritomo was a political genius, and his wife was no slouch in that department either, which made for epic domestic arguments. After Yoritomo's death, Hojo Masako became a nun. But instead of leaving political life, she decided to keep her clan in power and nurture the government that her husband created. They called her the Nun Shogun. Masako was born in 1157 to Hojo Tokimasa. The Hōjō were a tiny slice in the large pie that was the Taira clan, the clan who dominated the Japanese court at the time. Hojo Tokimasa was the head of the Hōjō family and was lord of some small lands in Izu province. He was actually the small fish in the area, surrounded by much bigger fish, but his fortunes would later change. In 1160, when Hojo Masako was 3 years old, the Taira exiled young Minamoto no Yoritomo to Izu province. His father had fought against the Taira in the Heiji rebellion and lost. Instead of forcing Yoritomo to follow his father to the underworld, the Taira exiled him to Izu, which they probably thought was the same thing. That turned out to be a big oof on their part. Eastern Japan was simmering as warriors gained more influence. Violence was about to boil over, and Yoritomo was about to pour that boiling pot over the heads of the Taira. Yoritomo stayed in exile for 2 decades, forgotten and probably bitter that his once great Minamoto clan was shattered, and likely missing the pleasure quarters in the capital too. When Masako was about 20 years old, she grew close to Yoritomo. There's a legend about how they met that went like this. Yoritomo was actually after Masako's younger sister. This mighty warrior wrote a love letter and told a samurai to deliver it to the sister. But the samurai made a mistake and handed it to Masako instead. For some reason, her sister then had a dream that she held the sun and moon in her hands. When she told Masako this, Masako convinced her sister that this was a bad omen and bought the dream from her. Yep, she bought the dream. She gave her sister a kosore for it. Back then, you could buy someone's bad dream to remove the bad luck from that person. But Masako was tricksy and believed that this was actually a good dream that would bring her good luck. It seemed to have worked out because she did become the wife of Yoritomo, who would later found the shogunate. The story was probably only a legend, though. When her father, Tokimasa, found out his daughter was simping for this dirty exile, he got super pissed. If his daughter married Yoritomo, it meant trouble for the Hōjō clan. You see, the Hōjō were part of the Taira clan, and the Taira were mortal enemies of the Minamoto. Also, the Taira had their grip around the Kyoto court at the time. The Taira in court could punish his family for taking in a dirty Minamoto, or at least Tokimasa's career in the capital could have been ruined. This was a real threat. It wasn't just Tokimasa being weird. For example, Yoritomo once impregnated the daughter of a different local lord. That lord killed the baby to avoid any trouble with the Taira elites. To be fair, that baby was a jerk. Hojo Tokimasa forbade Masako from continuing the relationship. He obviously had never read a love story, because one dark and rainy night, Masako ran away from home. She hiked the mountain roads to be with her lover. It was supposed to be a long trek, too, so here we see that toughness in her. The couple lived in a mountain temple for a while, hiding from Masako's father, until the old man finally relented and allowed them to marry. So, why did Masako go against her father's wishes? Was it really for love, or was it for something else? There is a view of Hojo Masako that she's ruthless and ambitious, so she might have wanted Yoritomo because he was a Minamoto and was destined for great things. She wanted to be the wife of a shogun. But this doesn't really make sense. We know that Yoritomo was going to be this great figure, but she didn't. Back then, the Minamoto name was pretty much dead. It had been dead for 2 decades. Also, having the Minamoto name could have been a disadvantage, because the Taira would never let him amount to anything. Yoritomo was in his 30s, old for the time. He was an exile, and he had no future in the capital. Masako was a small-town girl living in a lonely world from a relatively small family. It seems like they really did fancy each other, and she really did do it for love. Hey, just let me have this wholesome story, okay? When Yoritomo rose up against the Taira, it was hard for Masako in the beginning. While Yoritomo went off to fight, bringing her father and brothers with him, Masako, her daughter, and her sisters stayed under the protection of a temple. It was the same temple that she and Yoritomo had hid in before. Yoritomo's revolt started out like my birthday parties. Only a few people answered his call. He lost his first battle and had to hide from the enemy in the mountains. That's also what happens at my parties. Masako heard the news, but did not know if anyone she knew survived. She had two choices: stay at the temple and wait for the Taira to come after her, or run away to hide somewhere else. The warrior monks of the temple were on the Minamoto side and were ready to defend her, but she knew that they'd be overwhelmed, so she chose to run to a small village, not knowing what the future held. After a month or so, she got word that her father and brothers survived, and so did Yoritomo. In fact, Yoritomo's rebellion was gaining steam, and warriors started rallying behind him. He created a headquarters at Kamakura. When Masako arrived at Kamakura, her world changed. Everyone treated her and her husband with respect, calling them by names reserved for members of the imperial family. She went from a woman of minor status to the wife of the most powerful man in the East. In 1181, Masako's position as Yoritomo's wife was secured when she gave birth to Yoriie, their first son, and Yoritomo's heir. It was a happy occasion, until she had to give up her son to another family. Why? Well, because of something called manoto. So you're familiar with wet nurses, right? No, wet nurse, woman you hire to breastfeed your baby. That's what manoto literally means, but it's so much more than that. A highborn family would give their child to another family who will raise the child. The mother wouldn't raise her own child. So manoto didn't just refer to the wet nurse, but the entire family that raises the child. Some manoto families didn't even breastfeed. The important thing was the raising of the child and supporting the child's future. Yoritomo chose a few different clans to be Yoriie's manoto. Most powerful among them were the Hiki. Now, this position was no joke, and you may misunderstand historical events if you don't take into account manoto relationships. It's another arena of politics, as if Japanese history isn't complicated enough. A child's manoto gave him strong allies outside of his family. And on the other side, being a manoto of a high-ranking child was one way to propel your family's status to the top. No need to sweat it out on the battlefield like those thick-headed samurai. A manoto's power is often tied to the success of the child under their care. If Yoriie became shogun after his dad, the Hiki would become one of the strongest clans. So watch out for these guys. They will do anything like backstabbing or murder to protect Yoriie's interests. Now, this is just a guess, but Masako probably didn't like the manoto system. It was something the highborn clans did. The Hōjō did not, at least not before now. She had been raising her daughter herself up to this point, but since her status skyrocketed overnight, it was expected. She must have hated giving up her son for others to raise. This may be why her relationship with Yoriie when he grew up was not a close one. Being the most powerful man in the East in the Kamakura period, Minamoto no Yoritomo had a lot of thirsty women to choose from, and he was more than willing to quench their thirst. Dehydration is a serious condition. His wife, Hojo Masako, was not so pleased, but she wasn't the type to suffer in silence. She preferred other people suffer instead. Two famous examples gave Masako the reputation of being a ruthless and super jealous wife. The first time was when Masako gave birth to her second child, a son. Back then, when a woman gave birth, she moved to a separate home for a few months, because you can't have that dirty womanly business in your own home, obviously. Masako did this, and when the time came, she was overjoyed when a boy popped out. He was going to be Yoritomo's heir. Masako came back home all happy to show Yoritomo the baby boy, and then forgot all about that BS when she discovered what had happened. While she was away, Yoritomo thought it was the perfect opportunity to fool around with another woman, and even let her couch surf in the house of one of his samurai. Look, when you're Yoritomo, you don't buy a girl a drink. That's an insult. You buy her a house. Masako thought, well, it is normal these days for a man to seek the bed of a woman other than his wife. Likewise, it's also normal for me to set that harlot on fire. And so she convinced one of Yoritomo's samurai to burn down the harlot's house. Unfortunately, she escaped the fire. When Yoritomo found out, he got super mad and cut off the top knot of that samurai who torched the house. It was the ultimate humiliation for a samurai. This whole incident briefly caused a rift between Yoritomo and the Hōjō clan, because Masako's father thought that Yoritomo dishonored his daughter, but soon everyone made up and things got back to normal. Although Yoritomo still continued meeting the woman, he was just more careful about it. Unfaithful Husband, the sequel, happened the next time Masako gave birth. It seemed Yoritomo had a thing for cheating while his wife gave birth. It's a rare fetish. He found the bed of a lady-in-waiting. When Masako came home, she would have blown a gasket if she knew what that was. She got mad though. Not wanting to face her wrath, Yoritomo fired his new love interest from her lady-in-waiting career. Now he may have done this to save the girl, because she was pregnant. The girl later gave birth to a boy. This wasn't enough for Masako, who made plans to kill the boy. The woman had to run out of town to save her son. Now, because of these incidents, people have called Masako ruthless and jealous. But is that really fair? It was normal for men to sleep with many women back then, because it was a polygamous society. But this was more common in the capital than in the provinces. Yoritomo was raised in the capital, so he was fine with it. But Masako was raised in the provinces, where they had less of that hippie shit. And then there was this fun tradition at the time called uwanariuchi, which means beating the secondary wife. You'll like this. So here's how marriages worked back in the Kamakura period. A man would typically go out with a bunch of women in his youth, and at some point he'll meet a special girl, and the couple would decide that she would be his main lover and the bearer of his legitimate children. But he still goes to see other women. A marriage back then was not permanent. It was not a until death do us part type of thing. So that's it for the similarities between marriages today and marriages back then. Now for the differences. We use the words marriage, husband, and wife, but that's just using modern words to describe things in the past in terms we understand. Relationships were more fuzzy. They didn't have official papers for marriages. It was a social thing. If everyone saw a couple as husband and wife, then that couple was husband and wife. But that meant if a husband wanted to leave, technically he could have just left and found another wife. That was bad news for the wife and her family, because in a typical marriage, the husband joined the wife's family, and it was the wife's family who gave him financial support. They were basically investing in him, hoping he'd go on to do something great. But if some little hoe comes by and gives Yoritomo a son, and he chooses to make his new side piece his main piece, that son becomes his heir, and all of the Hojo's investment in him would be wasted. So Masako, logically, had to cut a bitch. It wasn't jealousy, it was pragmatic. Okay, probably a little jealousy. This practice of the wife attacking the husband's new lover was called uwanariuchi. It was actually socially acceptable. People were like, well, yeah, it's the wife's right to burn that tramp's house. So Masako wasn't being overly jealous. She acted perfectly normally for the time. There was another famous incident that strained their marriage, and that involved the beautiful Shizuka Gozen, or Lady Shizuka. She's a very famous figure. Like a lot of historical accounts at the time, it's hard to tell what is fact and what is fiction, but we can still enjoy the story. Yoritomo started a manhunt for his brother, Minamoto no Yoshitsune. Yoshitsune was a threat and became an enemy of the state. Yoshitsune already had a wife and consort, but he also had a lover in Lady Shizuka, who was a famous dancer from the capital. Yoritomo's forces happened to capture her for interrogation, but she didn't give up any info on Yoshitsune's whereabouts. Yoritomo ordered her sent to him, probably to the annoyance of his wife. Unfortunately for Yoritomo, Lady Shizuka was already pregnant with Yoshitsune's child, and he wasn't into that, so he didn't do anything with her. But he did order her to dance for him and a few of his loyal samurai, even though she was already super pregnant. Yoritomo may have even entertained the idea of pardoning her afterwards. On the day when Lady Shizuka was supposed to perform, Hojo Masako surprised Yoritomo by showing up to make sure her husband wasn't up to no good. Lady Shizuka started dancing. Everyone thought it was a beautiful dance, but she surprised Masako and horrified Yoritomo's samurai when she started to sing. She sang about her fierce love for Yoshitsune. It was a melodic smack to Yoritomo's face. Having Shizuka sing about her lover right in front of him and his samurai was more than Yoritomo could take, and he stormed out. Any thoughts of letting her off easy vanished from his mind. But Masako was impressed. This goes against the idea that she was the jealous type. She spoke up to Yoritomo on Shizuka's behalf. Masako compared Shizuka's love for Yoshitsune to her own love for Yoritomo when she left home against her father's wishes and trekked over mountain roads to be with him. Perhaps because of Masako's influence, Yoritomo spared Lady Shizuka's life. She didn't get off free, though. He said that if Shizuka gave birth to a girl, then she could bring it home and take care of it. If she gave birth to a boy, though, he would kill the boy. And when the time came, Lady Shizuka gave birth to a boy, and they killed him, Shizuka went back to the capital and became a nun. She died a year later. There are more details to the story, so let me know in the comments if you want me to tell it. Now, I do have some info that may change the way you see this story. The story implies that Masako may have convinced Yoritomo to spare Shizuka's life, but she was probably going to be spared anyways, because she was not Yoshitsune's main wife. Also, Yoritomo killing Shizuka's baby son may seem cruel, and you would think it was because the son could come after him when he grew up. But again, this was not a big risk, because Shizuka was not Yoshitsune's wife or official consort. She didn't have a big house or big name behind her. The main reason for killing the baby was because of another custom at the time, the idea that boys belonged to their father and girls belonged to their mother. This custom was written down during the Kamakura period, but probably existed long before. Since the boy belonged to his father, Yoshitsune, and his father was a traitor, the boy deserved death. It was not overly barbaric on Yoritomo's part, just a little barbaric. What would you do if your son was a selfish, egotistical little wanker? In this episode of As the Shogunate Turns, we talk about Minamoto no Yoriie. He was the second shogun of the Kamakura shogunate and the eldest son of Hojo Masako. Masako didn't have a close relationship with her son, Yoriie. He was raised not by her, but by his multiple manoto, or guardian families. She didn't have much chance to see him, and even when they did meet, his guardians were there. Ever since Yoriie was born, these families had all been massaging his bum, hoping for a whiff of power once he succeeded his father, the first Kamakura shogun, Minamoto no Yoritomo. The Hiki clan was the strongest of these families. Now, if you grew up surrounded by people tickling your kintama 24/7, you'd probably be a little spoiled. Yoriie became selfish and hard-headed, and had a strong bond to the Hiki family that raised him. In 1199, the shogun Yoritomo was thinking back with pride at the military government that he created. But he should have been doing less thinking and more paying attention because he fell off his horse and died. That's right, the leader of the great Minamoto clan, known for their horse archery, died by falling off his horse. It's funny how people later on tried to rationalize this, because it's a little embarrassing. After all, future shoguns claimed to be descended from the Minamoto. People said things from, oh, it was a plot by his enemies, to, it was his wife's jealous spirit taking revenge for his cheating. Points for creativity, but sometimes a fall is just a fall. After his death, Masako became a Buddhist nun. But she did not go live a secluded life in some monastery, oh no. She stayed in the middle of that nest of vipers that was Kamakura. Her son Yoriie became the leader of the Kamakura shogunate. The apple fell far from the tree. He was no political genius like his father, but he did follow in his father's footsteps, finding fondness for the female form for sure. Yoriie was bloodthirsty. He was butt-thirsty. He almost started a war over a woman. One day, Yoriie sent one of his vassals away to fight bandits in some province because he heard reports of bandits there. The samurai named Adachi Kagemori accepted the mission and went bandit hunting. Once Kagemori had gone, Yoriie kidnapped Kagemori's concubine. He just made up that whole bandit story. When Kagemori returned banditless, he realized that he was also concubineless. He got so mad and just sulked in his room because Yoriie is the shogun. He was mad though. Instead of apologizing like a decent dictator, Yoriie gathered some men to kill Kagemori just in case Kagemori wanted to rebel. Before a freaking civil war started over a stolen concubine, our girl Masako stepped in. Adachi Kagemori's dad was actually the messenger who used to deliver the love letters between her and Yoritomo way back in the day. He was her love messenger. The Adachi had always been loyal. Masako sent her son a letter telling him to stop being a twat-knuckle, then spent a night at the Adachi's home as Yoriie's men stood outside not knowing what to do. She didn't leave until the men outside left. Yoriie eventually let the woman go a few days later. Masako prevented bloodshed and was pretty much the only person who could keep Yoriie's behavior in check. Being Yoritomo's widow gave her power, and she knew how to use it. Yoriie was out of control. He was totally in the arms of the Hiki clan that raised him. He married a Hiki woman, and he was a member of the Hiki Patreon. He was out of control. In land disputes, he kept ruling in favor of Hiki clan members, and everyone else was pulling their top knot out in frustration. If there's one thing that samurai hate, it's you taking their land away. It rarely ends well. The higher-ups in the government eventually said, I just can't, and blocked Yoriie from ruling in these disputes. They created a council of 13 people, including the heads of top military clans, to handle these cases instead. Minamoto no Joffrey was mad, of course. How dare they take away some of his power? But what was he gonna do? War against the strongest warrior houses in the east? Instead, as an oh yeah, Yoriie issued an order saying that only 5 of his closest followers, his little injustice league, could have direct access to him. Plus, they had immunity from any crime, so they could kill someone and get away with it. That'll show those meanies. Now, the main conflict in the Kamakura government around this time was between 2 clans, the Senju and the Uchiha, the Hiki and the Hōjō. The Hiki had the most influence. They were Yoriie's main guardian family, his main manoto, and Yoriie preferred them over his mother's own Hōjō clan. But remember how samurai hated losing their lands? Because Yoriie kept ruling in favor of the Hiki in land disputes for the smallest reasons, many longtime supporters of the Minamoto found more and more of their lands being given to the Hiki. Hatred for the Hiki and for Yoriie slithered through the halls of Kamakura and gathered behind the Hōjō clan. The Hiki leader was Hiki Yoshikazu. The Hōjō leader was Hojo Tokimasa. These 2 clans were playing the same game, called Shogun Pong. It's like beer pong, but the cups are the Shogun position, and the ball is a little boy. Whoever threw their little boy into the Shogun cup first wins. You see, neither Hiki Yoshikazu nor Hojo Tokimasa could be shogun. They were not of Minamoto blood. They had to back a real Minamoto, preferably someone young, to be a puppet shogun while they ruled from behind. So, who did they choose? To understand that, let's look at the family tree first. It's a big tree, I know, but don't worry, it's about to get much smaller. First, we had Hojo Tokimasa. His daughter was Hojo Masako, who was married to Minamoto no Yoritomo. Masako and Yoritomo's eldest son was Minamoto no Yoriie. They had more kids, but this tree is about people who matter. Yoriie's main guardian family, his main manoto, was the Hiki, headed by Hiki Yoshikazu. Yoriie ended up marrying Yoshikazu's daughter, the Lady Wakasa. Yoriie and Lady Wakasa's son was Minamoto no Ichiman. It was this baby Ichiman that Hiki Yoshikazu wanted to back. If Ichiman became the next shogun, he'd be fully under the Hiki's power. Now, Masako and Yoritomo had another son, Sanetomo. Unlike Yoriie, Sanetomo was not put under the guardianship of the Hiki. His manoto was Masako's own sister, the Lady Awa, and her husband, Zensei. This decision to give Sanetomo to Lady Awa was probably Masako's idea. Seeing the power the Hiki had over Yoriie, she didn't want any of that BS for her second son. Giving Sanetomo to the care of her sister allowed Masako to take part in raising him. A solid idea, as it turns out. Hojo Tokimasa secretly picked Sanetomo to be his bull. He was planning a coup, and the young Sanetomo would be a good alternative to that Hiki-loving little knob yanker. Oh, and this Zensei fella was also looking to gain some power, being Sanetomo's guardian and all. Alright, now that we have this cool family tree, the fun begins. Let's start pruning. In 1203, Yoriie fell really sick, and everyone thought his days were numbered. Both sides started salivating because this was the opportunity they were waiting for. Everyone started placing their go pieces. Hiki Yoshikazu convinced Yoriie to brand Zensei a traitor and sent men to arrest Zensei and his wife, Lady Awa. Lady Awa ran to Masako's residence, and Masako refused to give up her sister to the men outside. But Zensei and his son were captured, exiled, then killed for good measure. Yoriie plotted with Hiki Yoshikazu to kill Hojo Tokimasa too. The story is that Masako heard their planning while she was standing behind paper doors, and warned her father, which honestly sounds too perfect to be real. Whatever the case, one day, Hojo Tokimasa invited Hiki Yoshikazu to some religious service to help Yoriie's recovery. On the way there, Hojo allies fell upon the Hiki leader and killed him. Team Hojo invaded the Hiki residence and wiped out the entire family. They torched the place, killing Yoriie's wife and his heir, Ichiman. Dun dun dun. When Yoriie heard this devastating news, he sent messengers to some of his samurai, telling them to go after the Hojo. Problem was, no one really liked Yoriie, so nothing happened. One samurai, in a show of loyalty to Team Hojo, killed the messenger that came to him, which was kinda dickish, to be honest. I'm anti-messenger killing. Yoriie had to become a monk and passed the shogun position to his brother, Sanetomo. They exiled Yoriie to Izu province, where he lived peacefully, and one day he took a bath and someone pulled a rope around his neck while other people stabbed him until he died. Now, did Hojo Tokimasa order this killing? I really want to think so, but no one knows for sure. Here's a question. Did Hojo Masako know of the plan to overthrow her own son? So the main historical text that talks about this time in history is the Azuma Kagami. The problem is that the Azuma Kagami was commissioned by the Hojo clan, so it's biased against Yoriie and the Hiki. Now, just because it's biased doesn't mean we dismiss everything in it. It just means we need to question its words, as with any text. The Azuma Kagami tells us that it was Masako who ordered the attack that deposed her son and killed her grandson. Because remember, Ichiman was her grandson. This is hard to believe. But maybe she did know about the coup, even if she didn't order it. But that would mean she didn't try to stop it, that she chose the Hojo clan over her own son. Also hard to believe. There's another hypothesis, though. Yoriie was really sick, and everyone thought he was about to take a long vacation to the underworld. If Masako believed that her son would die anyways, then she wasn't choosing the Hojo over her own son. She was choosing the Hojo over the Hiki. And she was choosing her other son, Sanetomo. One other thing we should question is how terrible Yoriie actually was. History is not kind to the second Kamakura shogun. He was a tyrant who spent his days playing games and seeking the arms of women. He had no positive qualities at all, says the biased Azuma Kagami. It was awfully convenient that the Hojo saved the country from this terrible, terrible guy. His terribleness must have been exaggerated, but to what extent, we don't know. Hojo Masako had 2 sons who both died. What do you think she did about it? Her first son was the second shogun of the Kamakura shogunate, Yoriie the Insufferable. Last time we saw that Yoriie was taking a bath when he was rudely interrupted by a murder. His own. Not nice, you don't disturb a person's bath. Masako was probably devastated, but she took comfort in the fact that her other son, Sanetomo, was alive, and he was the shogun. The guy who masterminded putting Sanetomo on the shogun's seat was Masako's father, Tokimasa, the head of the Hōjō family. Things really turned out well for him because he basically became the most powerful man in the shogunate once Sanetomo became shogun. Tokimasa took the position of Shiken, which would later mean regent for the shogun, someone who ruled on behalf of the shogun. At the time, Shiken just meant the head representative of a group. It wasn't until later, when his son took charge, that Shiken came to mean regent. But it doesn't matter because he wielded authority like a regent. In a power move, he transferred the new shogun out of Masako's residence and into his own home, removing the shogun from Masako's eye. Sanetomo, the new leader of the badass military government, was like, oh, okay. Tokimasa ran the place. Most orders that came out of the shogunate only had his signature on them. Now, Hojo Masako knew that her previous son, Yoriie the Incompetent, wasn't the best leader. He was raised by another family, not by Masako herself. He grew up to be selfish and arrogant, but despite those positive qualities, he was not a fan of the Hojo clan, which was something she disliked in her shoguns. With her second son, Masako thought, well, I helped raise Sanetomo myself, so he'll grow up to be just like his father. He didn't. Now, Minamoto no Sanetomo wasn't a throbbing dickhead like his late brother, but he didn't seem interested in doing shogun stuff. That, or he was so controlled by Tokimasa that he couldn't. He was the artsy type that went to poetry readings in dimly lit rooms and snapped his fingers somberly. He was excellent at poetry and enjoyed a lot of praise. I'm gonna give him some credit here. At first, obsessing over poetry may sound like a way to avoid your responsibilities, like leaving your career to start a YouTube channel, but it wasn't. It's called diplomacy, you guys, the art of making friends for power. It's hard to criticize celebrities that you like. Mila Kunis could smack a baby in the head and I'd be like, yeah, but what kind of faces was that baby making at her? Does he have a criminal history? What did he Google in the past 30 days? We must know the truth. Wake up, sheeple! Nobles of the imperial court in Kyoto fawned over Sanetomo for his mad poetry skills. He rose to become one of the highest ranking people in Kyoto. This likely helped smooth the growing tension between the two governments in Japan, the shogunate in Kamakura and the traditional imperial government in Kyoto. With Sanetomo as puppet shogun, poet shogun, and Tokimasa as regent, the Hōjō clan was having a grand old time pursuing their favorite form of entertainment, removing political enemies. Netflix wasn't invented yet. The thing you gotta know about this family is that the Hōjō was a minor clan. The Hōjō were just lucky that they rode on the coattails of the first shogun, Minamoto no Yoritomo, a cheeky person could say, before dying mysteriously the next day. Remember, the Minamoto clan was almost destroyed, and Yoritomo lived in the countryside, ashamed and forgotten. It was Hojo Tokimasa who supported his cause, allowing him to raise an army, to win a war, and establish the first shogunate. After Yoritomo won, Tokimasa thought the Hōjō clan would become an influential clan. He wanted to be part of the Big Boys Club. A club with that name sounds kinda sketchy, but you wouldn't want to be part of the Little Boys Club either, so I get it. But after Yoritomo took power, he left Tokimasa hanging. It didn't seem like Tokimasa had any important responsibilities while Yoritomo was in power. Tokimasa had lifted Yoritomo up from nothing, and this was the thanks he got? So when his grandson Sanetomo became shogun, Tokimasa was determined to give his family the legacy that they deserved. The Hōjō's major weakness was their low background, so they never tried to become shogun themselves, but they were alright with ruling behind the scenes. While he, and later his son, led the Hōjō, they somehow destroyed 6 leading samurai clans, all families that were loyal to the late Yoritomo. Coincidentally, these families had all been owners of land the Hōjō had their eyes on. But Tokimasa made a mistake when he ordered the destruction of one of these clans, claiming that they were plotting rebellion. His son, Hōjō Yoshitoki, had to carry out the killing, even though he thought it was BS, and he had to kill a friend. It caused a rift between the two. When your dad forces you to execute your friend, Thanksgiving dinner gets a bit awkward. In 1205, a rumor spread on Twitter that Tokimasa planned to overthrow the shogun and replace him with his son-in-law. People mainly blamed his young wife for putting the idea in his head. It was a dumb idea, but he was an old man with a hot young wife. It's understandable. By this time, his daughter Masako had already lost 3 of her kids. Now her father is planning a coup on her son? The nerve she had it. She and Yoshitoki, sister and brother, struck first. She moved Sanetomo back to her own residence. He was a puppet, so it was easy to move him. Poet! Then Yoshitoki gathered a bunch of men to show he meant business. Tokimasa saw that things were dire and agreed to be exiled. That's right, the kids exiled their own father. They even sent someone to kill Tokimasa's son-in-law. Funny thing though, it does seem weird that Tokimasa would choose to overthrow the shogun, especially since he put the kid on the shogun's seat in the first place. It could be that Tokimasa had deeper conflicts with his children, and Masako and Yoshitoki decided to frame their father to get him out of the way, but that's only speculation. Tokimasa's exile left Yoshitoki and Masako as 2 of the senior members of the shogunate. Yoshitoki would have had weak support if it wasn't for Masako. Her status as Yoritomo's widow helped to legitimize him. Still, they had way less power than Tokimasa had at first. But it wasn't until something happened in 1219 that they were able to grab control of the shogunate and never let go. There was a monk named Kugyo. He was the son of the previous shogun, Yoriie the Dum-Dum Butt. When he was a kid, his father was killed in the bathtub, like we mentioned before, and he blamed the Hōjō family for it. It must have seemed pretty unfair to Kugyo that his father's killers were doing so well. Luckily for him, murder is always an option. One day in 1219, the shogun Sanetomo was at a ceremony. He was walking down some steps with a sword bearer who was also part of the ceremony. Kugyo jumped out with some men and yelled, "I strike at my father's enemy." Then he struck at his father's enemy, who was his uncle, by the way, this family. Kugyo's men also killed the sword bearer, who immediately regretted going to sword-bearing school. Sanetomo's body fell on the snow, but his head started riding down a road away from the ceremony. Kugyo was carrying it, of course. He hid somewhere and sent a messenger to inform his ally, a man named Miura Yoshimura. When Yoshimura heard, he told Kugyo to stay put, and then he let the Hōjō know where Kugyo was. Yoshitoki ordered Yoshimura to kill the guy, and pretty soon Kugyo was in possession of two heads, Sanetomo's and his own. He got beheaded. With Kugyo and the shogun Sanetomo dead, it ended Yoritomo's family line. Now there's a theory about what may have happened behind the scenes. It says that this Miura Yoshimura guy actually talked Kugyo into doing the assassination. Kugyo was very close with the Miura clan. They raised him while he was a baby. Yoshitoki was supposed to be the sword bearer at the ceremony, but he got sick at the last minute and was replaced by some poor schlep. The plan was to kill both the shogun Sanetomo and Yoshitoki, then make Kugyo shogun and the Miura clan the regent family. But when Kugyo failed to kill Yoshitoki, Miura Yoshimura feared retaliation and betrayed Kugyo. Joke's on him though, because years later, the Hōjō would destroy the Miura clan anyways. Victory! You do feel bad for Masako. She lost her husband and all of her children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. But with this death, the Wonder Twins' powers activated. Masako and her brother Yoshitoki used the shogun's death to consolidate power. This was when Yoshitoki's regency really took off. Without a shogun, the governing council had no authority to pass edicts, and Yoshitoki stepped in to rule, similar to how his father did. Masako also became a huge figure, her presence reminding the samurai of the glory days of her husband. Brother and sister controlled the shogunate, giving the Hōjō clan a bright future. And then war broke out. Let's talk about her final years and her role in a war that leveled up the shogunate's power in the country. Last time, we talked about the death of the third shogun, Minamoto no Sanetomo, by the hands of his nephew, who also died later. The shogun had no children. He was the son of Hojo Masako and the first shogun, Minamoto no Yoritomo. This meant that it was the end of the leading Minamoto family line, the line that descended from Yoritomo. This is why parents want you to have kids so badly. It's a matter of national security. The Hōjō clan had a problem. Their influence originated from their relationship with the first shogun, Yoritomo, and his descendants. Most of the warrior families with any clout in the shogunate had served under Yoritomo in the past and really respected him. But time is a bitch, and bitches be forgetful. Their memories would fade over time. And if some strong Minamoto seizes the shogun position, he could just demolish all that influence the Hōjō had collected. Through decades of hard work and murder, the Hōjō needed a shogun they could control. Let's roll back to before the third shogun Sanetomo's assassination. The Hōjō leader was Yoshitoki, and Masako was his elder sister. Brothers and sisters nowadays bond by watching TV shows together. These two bonded by hatching political schemes. They wanted the next shogun to be a person with premium blood, but subpar brains. A person who would have great legitimacy, but someone they could control. So, who has premium blood? People from the imperial family. And who are total stupids? Babies. So, they decided on the baby son of retired Emperor Go-Toba. Go-Toba was the actual leader of the government in Kyoto, even though he had officially stepped down from the throne. In the Kamakura period, Japan had 2 governments sharing the governing. The traditional imperial court in Kyoto and the military shogunate in Kamakura. In 1218, Masako visited the capital of Kyoto. She met with a powerful court lady to push for this plan to make Go-Toba's son the next shogun. These things happen nowadays too. You know when your mom gets together with her friends for brunch? They're discussing your future and how it could help elevate the family and eliminate their enemies. It's true. Retired Emperor Go-Toba agreed to have his baby son succeed the then shogun Sanetomo. He thought it was a great idea. It would form a blood bond between the two governments and give him more influence over the shogunate, bringing him closer to his dream of absorbing the shogunate into the imperial court. But, like all dreams, it didn't come true. One day, Sanetomo ate the blade of a sword. Gotoba reneged on his deal, probably hoping for a bad succession dispute in Kamakura. Masako was sad that her son was brutally murdered, but work had to be done. She found another candidate to be the next shogun, the young Kujo Yoritsune. Very young, he was 2 years old. He wasn't from the imperial family, but he was from the next best thing, the noble clan of Fujiwara. This 2-year-old was surprisingly really smart. He was able to navigate very well the political dealings and schemes of Lego figures in his Lego court, and was a master of placing one block on top of another block. The kid was shipped off to Kamakura to be almost shogun. Almost because retired Emperor Gotoba had to officially declare him shogun. Gotoba procrastinated, probably hoping for uncertainty and chaos in Kamakura. But Yoshitoki and Masako didn't really mind. They wanted a figurehead shogun anyways. Yoshitoki and Masako had the shogunate in the palms of their hands. It was because of her huge influence after her son's death that people called Masako the Nun Shogun. In 1221, retired Emperor Gotoba declared war, the Jokyu War. Gotoba was an interesting guy. He was smart and had a reputation for being a bit of a perv. He invited famous dancers from all over and had them dance in his chambers and under his sheets. He even took lands from nobles and from temples and shrines to give to his favorite dancers. It was fortunate for the capital that he never discovered OnlyFans. Once he tried to give land that was under the protection of the shogunate to one of his dancers. He and Yoshitoki had a huge argument. He never did get that land, and the whole thing just made everyone mad at each other. You can see the tensions grow between the Kyoto capital and the Kamakura shogunate. Gotoba always wanted to get rid of the shogunate, or at least put it under his authority. He slowly gathered allies among the warriors of western and central Japan, especially people who felt neglected by the shogunate. Kamakura did tend to ignore samurai who lived outside of the Kanto region. Gotoba gambled that the western and central warriors would rise up and help him overwhelm Kamakura. In 1221, Gotoba declared war on Hojo Yoshitoki, calling him a usurper who took advantage of the young would-be shogun. I won't talk too much about the war, that would be a different video, but Masako does have a role in it. After hearing the news, Masako summoned the top warriors of the shogunate and gave a speech, telling them to raise their bows and swords against the imperial capital. She name-dropped her husband, which you should do in every speech to Kamakura warriors, and reminded them of their duty. The speech was so moving that the men shed tears, and were all clamoring to give the imperial court a good beating. A huge army gathered. Yoshitoki held a war council, and they talked about war stuff. The council was divided. On one side were people who wanted to march on the capital immediately and bust some heads. On the other side were the little sissy hoes who wanted to fortify the roads and wait for the imperial army to come. Yoshitoki consulted with Masako, who was not a sissy hoe, and she recommended they attack immediately. Don't even wait for the war council, they're too slow. So without asking the council, they sent the commander of the army marching towards Kyoto with a small force. It worked, and within a few days, the entire army followed the leader. The war was on. The historical texts say the Kamakura army had 190,000 men. But that's like asking a guy how big his sword is. You can't trust his answer. He'll say he has a katana when all he's packing is a tanto. But the Kamakura army was still huge compared to the other side. Unfortunately for Gotoba, his gamble didn't pay off. The number of warriors rising up against the shogunate was smaller than expected. It was a lost cause. If you read the historical texts about what was happening in the capital as the army was marching closer and closer, they're pretty funny. You get the sense that the people in the palace were just depressed. You had entries that were basically like this. May 26. Huge army coming from Kamakura. Only the gods can save us. Everyone is upset. May 28. Huge army killed some of our men. Still coming. Everyone is gloomy. June 1st. Million-man army still coming. No one knows what to do. The Kamakura army destroyed the other side. Winning this war made the shogunate the big brother in this two-government system. Gotoba blamed evil ministers for dropping evil plans in his ears before getting his butt exiled, along with the rest of his body. A lot of the Kyoto samurai were hunted down and executed. Masako's word carried a lot of weight, so some of the people on the run begged Masako to save their lives, and she sometimes did. There was a funny story about one dude who sent a message to Masako asking her to spare his life. When the men came for him, he pleaded with them to wait until Masako's reply letter came. When it arrived, it showed that Masako did grant him a temporary pardon. But he was already killed. His executioner didn't wait. Oops. The shogunate seized the land of all the court nobles and warriors who fought for the other side. Masako took the task of handing these pieces of land out to Kamakura samurai according to their service in the war. She also gave out rewards to exceptional samurai, like this one guy who suffered constant demands from retired Emperor Gotoba to join the imperial army. When he kept refusing, Gotoba's allies attacked him. He hid in the mountains with his men, then joined the shogunate's army when it came marching his way. Masako's brother, Yoshitoki, died in 1224. His wife's family could have just left things alone, but they made moves to try and replace the shogun and take power away from the Hōjō. Masako was like, "Bitch, you know who I am." She discovered the plot and exiled the wife. She even personally visited the house of a possible conspirator. He had to get on his hands and knees to bow and swear his loyalty to her. Hojo Masako died in 1225 at the age of 68. She did a good job fighting for the military government that her husband created. Wait, how did her husband make a brand new government in the first place? Click here to see one of the most important wars in Japanese history, the Genpei War.